Okay, thank you, Holger. Thank you. Hello, and welcome to this side event called How Tax Cuts and Purchase Premiums Can Boost Cycling. This event is jointly organized by the European Cyclist Federation and Cycling Industries Europe. So thank you for joining us today, and also thank you to the organizing team at the PEP and our Austrian hosts for enabling us to hold this workshop. So my name is Caroline Cerfontaine. I work at the European Cyclist Federation, where I'm in charge of Velocity, the largest cycling conference in the world that will take place later this year in September in Lisbon. But today I'm very honored to moderate this session with our three very knowledgeable speakers, Laurent, Demilie, Kevin Mayne, and Holger Haubold. So coming to the topic of fiscal incentives, as you have seen, there's an impressive boom for cycling going on around the globe. In our fight against the climate change, we need to really drastically reduce carbon emissions, and therefore we need to implement measures to turn this boom into a lasting trend. So the objective of our session today is show you the role fiscal incentives can play in enabling more people to permanently change their travel behavior towards more cycling. Because besides safe and convenient cycling infrastructure, tax breaks and purchase premiums and other measures are really important instruments that can help and make a difference to step up cycling all around Europe and around the world. The positive effects have been proven in the past by different studies, and our speakers today will tell us more about it. At the same time, the schemes that are being put in place around Europe recently have shown that bike sales are really booming in Europe. So there is positive impacts, and it is really important to focus on not only infrastructure, but also on fiscal and financial incentives. But let's move on with our presentations. So we will first listen to our three speakers, and then we will have a panel discussion with question and answers. So please do not hesitate to put your questions in the Q&A sections that you will see on the right-hand side of your screen under Q&A. I will take a look at these, and then we can ask these questions after the three presentations. But now we will start with our first speaker, and that is my colleague Holger Haubold. Holger is our Director for Intellectual Property and Data Collection at the European Cyclist Federation. He's responsible for studies on fiscal incentives for cycling in Europe and also on the economic benefits of cycling. He has previously worked at the Council of the European Union and in corporate public affairs. He holds a master's degree in EU studies in economics from the ULB in Brussels. Today, we will hear from Holger about a brand new tool that was launched today by the European Cyclist Federation about fiscal incentives. Holger, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Caroline. So I will start sharing my my presentation. Okay. You should be able to see it now. Is that the case? Yeah. Okay. Great. So yeah, I will give you an introduction today on tax incentives and purchase premiums for cycling in Europe, and then also share with you the news on our new tool in that field, so that you can have a look yourself afterwards and see which schemes or incentives are in place, maybe in your region or in your city or in your country. So yeah, maybe just a very quick introduction to ECF. Our motto is more and better cycling for all in Europe. I think that's self-explanatory. We are the European umbrella federation of member-based civil society organizations advocating and working for more and better cycling. We promote cycling as a sustainable and healthy means of transport and leisure. And with more than 60 member organizations from over 40 countries, we harness the power of the European cycling movements. We are based in Brussels and our roots are in Europe, but the challenges that we face are global. So now directly into the topic. First of all, a little quote, which is, I think, very fitting. I think you know that guy on the photo, the current US President, Joe Biden. But he made this, he made this quote when he was actually a vice president under Obama. And he said, don't tell me what you value, show me your budget and I'll tell you what you value. And I think this is very true, not only for budgets in general, but also in the field of mobility, because we see that there are a lot of speeches about to support. But when we look at the budgets and at the incentives that are given, a lot is still given to unsustainable modes. And yeah, we would of course like to see this changed. So that's why we're working on this topic of fiscal incentives and purchase premiums for cycling. So a quick introduction on where we are today in this respect. Cars are dominant in commuting, transport in general. This leads to a number of problems in terms of CO2 emissions that are still too high. Transport sector is still a big issue in that respect, but also to a lack of space in cities, to congestion, and then also to health problems linked to poor air quality and to inactivity. And we think that cycling is actually a solution to all of this. So that's why we also think that the incentives need to be set right between these modes, so between motorized transport and other modes, active transport like cycling and walking, but also public transport. And the situation we are in today is, especially in Europe and in specific countries, also because of perverse incentives in tax systems, first of all for company cars, but this is something we can debate, maybe also for electric cars, because there are a lot of incentives given for electric cars also at the moment, also planned, for example, in the recovery funds of the EU and of member states. But we see that electric cars might reduce CO2 emissions, but they don't solve other problems like inactivity or space issues, or issues like congestion, for example. So yeah, I think that's something for debate, if that's not also maybe a perverse incentive to give so much money to electric cars. In any case, this situation is so acute that even big car producers, like for example BMW, now recommends its employees to cycle to work instead of using their company car. So this is actually, I find it quite ironic that even car producers, they see that okay, around their headquarters there's too much congestion. They don't have enough parking spaces for all their employees, so they just recommend them to go by bike instead of using their expensive company BMWs. Luckily, there's also a movement in the opposite direction, let's say. So there's a trend towards more incentives also for cycling. This has started during the last decade. So at ECF, we started really to work on this in 2014. So there were some schemes in place already back then, but we really saw that this has accelerated with the cycling boom during the pandemic. So this is a very positive development, and that's also why we decided to put in place this new tool to have an overview of the incentives and the schemes that are in place. And what we have found is that already 14 out of 27 EU countries have put in place tax incentives or purchase premiums of one type or the other during the last 2 years, let's say. So I think that's already quite a good start. Of course, it could always be more. So which types of incentives are we talking about? So first of all, tax cuts for distance-based commuting allowances offered by employers. That's an example that Mr. Demilie will speak about a bit more, I think, concerning Belgium. Then the provision of company bicycles for commuting, but also for private fringe benefits that are free of tax or at low tax rates, which is also very stimulating. Then scrappage schemes for polluting vehicles that offer a subsidy for electric bicycles as a replacement. Also a very interesting model. So this has been put in place, for example, last year in Finland and in Lithuania. And now France is considering something similar. And then finally, direct purchase incentives for various types of bicycles. So now for the some more detailed explanations. On the tax cuts for distance-based commuting allowances, really the pioneer country here was Belgium. So that's a measure that has been in place in Belgium since 1999. And there's a tax-free reimbursement that employers can pay for the way to work of 24 cents per kilometers. I won't go into too much detail because I think Mr. Demilie will give us more explanations about that and also about the effects of this scheme in his presentation. But just a side note, we made some calculations on how much money you could really get as an employee from the different schemes, and we see that this is not that high still compared, for example, to company cars in Belgium. So even for this positive example, there's still work to do. Then the tax cuts for the provision of company bicycles. They are in place in numerous countries now: Austria, Belgium, Finland, France, Germany, Ireland, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. And recently, Sweden has also announced that they want to put in place a similar scheme. So that means that you get a bicycle from your employer, basically, and on receiving this bicycle, you don't have to pay an income tax. So normally, if your employer gives you, for example, expensive gifts, let's say, or expensive benefits, then this is taxed. You have to pay income tax on that. But for this, that's not, or the taxation is very low. This is, of course, especially attractive for e-bikes, and because they cost a bit more. So the tax savings are higher there, and this is helpful for cyclists because they get high quality bikes that they can use in their daily life. For the bike industry and for innovative business models, for example, for bicycle leasing. And Kevin Mayne, our speaker from Cycling Industries Europe, will give you more details on that in his presentation on how this also helps to create innovative business models, growth in the bike industry, and jobs. Then car scrappage schemes offer
Okay, I think we lost Holger because I cannot hear him anymore. So we'll just give him a second to maybe come back. Otherwise, we'll have to switch to our next speaker. Yep, I think we lost both Laurent and Holger as I see it. So this. Yes. Okay, no worries. So what we'll do is, given that only Kevin and myself are in the presentation part now, I may ask Kevin, are you there? Do you hear us?
I am there, Caroline.
Are you ready to take over now?
I can follow on at a good moment, maybe, because Holger already introduced me. So if I don't get kicked out of the call, so hello, audience. My name's Kevin Mayne. I'm the Chief Executive of Cycling Industries Europe, which is the umbrella body for companies' representation at the European level. So we provide a business partnership for European Cyclists Federation. And myself, I've been involved in cycling advocacy for something like 20 years. And actually, I go kind of right back to the beginning of some of these incentive schemes in my work in the UK before I came to the European level. So what I hope to do was to extend Holger's talk and talk a bit about why it might seem obvious that there's a business sector interest, but I think it's more than boosting sales of our members. So I can try and switch to my presentation, which hopefully Caroline can tell me she can see. Right. Perfect. So I've called this kind of going further, and about how I think the kind of work that's been done on tax and fiscal incentives has actually allowed us to stretch things, and how the business sector has really built on this kind of thinking in recent years. And I share with ECF colleagues the kind of the why, but I take it even kind of further because yes, there's a degree of level playing field, and to be honest, coming from the corporate side, this is marketing. This is actually telling a story about cycling that makes it, just for example, the financial press, where it wouldn't normally cover cycling. And so, and I remember in Sweden when incentives were kind of like, the story was that an e-bike was the number one bike for the number one present for Christmas. And so we break new ground. But then really, what does it do to cycle use? And I think there I will just talk about the fact we see upgrading, we see access, and we have seen a new corporate market. And talk about why do we compare this with cars? Well, I just thought I'd throw this slide up, which looks at what's happened to bicycle prices over the 5 years to 2019. And we might call this the e-bike effect, where you see a growth, but in many countries, it's actually a combination not only of do people want to buy more expensive bikes, but also do they have access to the finance that makes this possible? And we will hear in detail, for example, about Belgium. But also equally in the countries to the right, if we don't have a culture of people treating the bicycle as a serious object of transport, fully equipped, then one of the instruments to get people to upgrade to an e-bike, a cargo bike, a high-quality commuting bike, is to wrap it in a financial package that makes it more accessible. So if any of the audience is coming from any of the countries on the right, possibly you need this more because you need a way forward, or you need alternatives, like for example, bike sharing. And we are a little bit fixated with auto leasing. But from the business community side, I would say it's the right peer group for us to look at, because it is entirely normal that vehicles in Europe are purchased through various forms of company scheme, whether it be given by the company, leased and rented by the company. And when you move to freight, you've got nearly half of all light commercial vehicles are in some kind of leasing scheme. And this talk, that currently attracts multi-billion euros of tax support. And, starting from that place, anybody concerned with growing cycling and substituting car growth must look at these instruments. And it's no surprise it's come across from that sector. And as Holger mentioned, in the company space, you get a lot of additional opportunities you don't have as a private individual. There are, in some countries, it's VAT. In fiscal policy for companies, you can write down assets at the end of their life. Employees, yes, can buy, but they can do schemes called salary sacrifice, where they take their before-tax income to use for a bike and make tax and social cost benefits. And the government can wrap any number of incentives inside this, and has done so over the years, but in the auto industry sector. And we felt it's time that this was also in the bicycle sector. And therefore, it's actually no surprise you actually discover that there's this tradition didn't start with purchase incentives for individual bikes. It actually started in company bike schemes where these advantages could be applied. And the sort of grandfather was the UK scheme. And I well remember those first meetings with some of the people trying to put this together, saying this could be a breakthrough way of working. But it did take nearly 4 years to actually get it into the tax system with an easy to use model for bicycles to be incorporated in the same way. And our colleagues from, as it was then, Leaserad, again, they had to work nearly 4 years to get an equitable tax treatment, even though the company bike scheme, copying the UK model, was ready to go. It didn't have the right tax treatment for nearly 4 years. And each of these startups, as they were, would have said, amazing. The breakthrough was the moment when you actually start to be able to talk tax, fiscal, payroll, and you deal with the process. The money's not as complicated as the process. And today, wow, Cycle to Work scheme in the UK was believed at one point to be influencing about a quarter of the adult bike market. And in Germany at the moment, the estimate is around 1 million users are actually benefiting from a company bike scheme, which is enormous in terms of penetration into the market. And when I take our members and colleagues, JobRad, who've really been at the forefront of this, and you look at the quality of companies that are now taking bicycles for their employees through this beneficial scheme, it's a pretty impressive list from around 30,000 companies just from one platform, which is JobRad, and there are numerous others. So quickly, people can build on that. It's not surprising that the business sector is excited by this because it has an impact, but it's not the normal business. And so we look to places this can go. Well, we can look at extensions, we can look at different business models, and we can look at a bit of innovation. And I will very just quickly flick through some quick impressions. Belgium, we will have discovered, but I noticed this, I think it was 2013 or 14, when suddenly on billboards all over Brussels, instead of a normal banking advertisement, KBC Bank was advertising bicycle leasing as one of its exciting new products, and very engaged in developing the product for the Belgian market. And others are, like our members, CTEC and others, do this. But it was clearly a breakthrough both for them and for us to see it go in a mainstream bank. Swapfiets. You may have seen the familiar bicycles with the blue tires in many cities now in 5 countries. Swapfiets is not really a fiscal model, but just, it started with the idea you can have a reliable bike for €17 a month. You deal with the problem of repair, of punctures, of theft, of loss, and everything else, and just wrap up in an easy, accessible model. And originally, effectively conceived in a country like the Netherlands, where everybody apparently has a bike. But not everybody has a working, reliable bike. And for example, the student market, very popular with parents to buy a package for their student when they kind of leave home. And people are stretching it even further. I'm delighted to say one of our members was this year's European Mobility Startup Prize winner, Pony. Pony's actually turned it around where they're effectively crowdsourcing the bikes. And as a participant, you could own a bike that goes into a rental fleet, enabling rental fleets to be extended and you to be de facto a shareholder, and you can earn by leasing your bike out to other people or renting it out to other people. We're beginning part of our work in a European project called City Changer Cargo Bike to look at the way this works in the cargo bike segment, which are a lot more expensive. But already in 2019, the UK and 1 or 2 other countries was putting out grant funds. At this point, it's largely grants, and we have some way to go to turn this into leasing and other tools, but it's coming to the corporate sector. So the corporate sector itself gains. And you really know you've arrived when, if you like, the competition takes it on. And wow, here's Volkswagen Financial Services saying, we're going to do bikes. Working with our member PON to provide this service in Germany, and then plan to roll it to Austria and other countries. Very, very impressive entrant. So this is for real. And our ambition from the cargo bike side is it should be for real in the commercial vehicle leasing sector. Not that every cargo bike company shouldn't have a lease plan option, but actually more the reverse, that every lease company should have a cargo bike option. So when you go along as a small business owner to your leasing company and they say, would you like a car, a van, or would you like 3 bicycles? It's actually built into the offer. We're not there yet, but it's a big future opportunity. So in summary, I put why at the start. Well, let's come back to why. It works. It does have a level playing field effect. It is creating the sort of storytelling we love. But look at what's happening. It is getting people to grade up into cargo bikes and into e-bikes in particular. But that links itself to ridership. We can see the statistics. We can see the value. And the valuable bicycles get used more. It improves access and is beginning to move us into the company vehicle fleet. You've seen the huge numbers in journey for individual travel. We begin the journey into corporate vehicle travel like freight and like commercial vehicles. So exciting opportunity, a lot to do, but a real kind of interesting breakthrough territory. So if you want to know more about that and our work and will join the discussion, please don't hesitate to get in touch with Cycling Industries Europe, and happy to share what we do.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for this very inspiring presentation. It's important to remind us and really show with the figures that you have shown that cycling does not only have enormous benefits and helps us fighting the climate change. It also creates jobs. It has a huge impact on the economy. And this is a very important message that we need to get across more clearly. Holger, I see you are now back, so maybe you could just jump right back into your presentation. I think we were somewhere at the scrapping schemes when you dropped out.
Sorry for that. I mean,
no worries.
That's Murphy's Law. Everything
how...
that can go wrong goes wrong at the worst possible moment. So, but now I'm
Don't
back,
worry.
and
Just
I hope
pick up where you
I
were.
stay online. Yes. Okay. So yeah, at the scrappage schemes. So just sharing my screen again. Okay, so now you should be able to see the presentation again. So yes, for these car scrappage schemes that offer a subsidy for electric bicycles as a replacement, yeah, as I said, they've been in place already before at the regional and at the local level. But with the COVID crisis, we saw that they were also introduced at national level, for example, in Lithuania and Finland. And now France has announced a similar scheme, which we're of course very happy to see. And we support this because it really supports the shift from a car-centered to a people-centered mobility system. So away from cars, also giving more space in urban areas, reducing congestion. And that's also why this has been a key demand of cycling sector organizations for the recovery funds in the EU and also member states of ECF, of Cycling Industry Europe, CONABI, and other organizations. Now for direct purchase incentives. So there are hundreds of regional and local schemes in place, which you can find on our new tool. The leading countries in this respect are Germany, Switzerland, and Belgium. So in Germany, you have over 70 schemes in place. In Switzerland, more than 60, and in Belgium, almost 40 schemes. And that's, of course, something that we're very happy to see. In 2020, we also saw some national schemes put in place in countries where maybe you wouldn't expect it at first, like Italy, Greece, and Portugal. So this is also a very, very encouraging sign. I think the Italian scheme had, in the end, over 120 million euros of funding, which is quite substantive. And these schemes have been in place already earlier in France and in Sweden. So they were in place there in 2017, 2018, and there have been studies on the effect on these of these schemes there, this has been shown to be very, very positive, both for the market development, but also for changes towards a more sustainable mobility system. So in France, e-bike sales practically doubled when the purchase subsidy was introduced. Which you can see on the graph here. But then also in France, they did a study among the recipients of the subsidy, and it was shown that 61% of the trips made with these e-bikes replaced trips that were previously made by car, either as a driver or as a passenger, or by fueled two-wheelers like scooters or mopeds. And then to finish, you can find all this information on our new web tools, which I would invite you to visit on our website. So we've made an inventory of these measures at national, regional, and local level. So both of the tax incentives, which are at national level, but then also of the purchase subsidy schemes, which are either at national, regional, or local level. You can find information about the size of the subsidy, the type of the bicycle. So, for example, electric bicycles or cargo bikes, on the eligible target groups. Of course, this is a tool that we hope will be growing in the future, so that we can see more schemes there. And of course, we want it also to be seen as a source of inspiration to introduce more tools also elsewhere. So thank you. That's it from me. And I think we can continue directly with Laurent after your introduction, Caroline.
Yes, thank you very much, Holger. Thank you for this very comprehensive overview of different types of of fiscal incentives that can be given across Europe. And thank you for presenting the new tool. Don't hesitate to take a look. It's really well done and will hopefully lead to having more impact and more people taking advantage of it. Now, let's move to somebody who is actually working hard every day to put that sort of measures into place. Our next speaker is Laurent Demilie. Laurent works at the Belgian Federal Ministry of Transport, where he is responsible for cycling, the environment, taxation, and research within the Direction for Sustainable Mobility. So thank you, Laurent, for showing us today about fiscal measures to promote bike use and their impacts in Belgium. Laurent, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I will present fiscal measures to promote bike use and their impact in Belgium. I will not present incentive to buy a bike, but federal measures at the level of the federal measure, not regional or local measures. Next slide, please. So first of all, I will present kilometer bike allowance. This is the biggest measure in Belgium. The bicycle allowance is a kilometer allowance granted by an employer to his worker who use a bicycle to cover all or part of the distance between their homes and their workplace. It is important to note that it is all or part of the distance. It could be the whole journey from home to office, or a part of the journey from home to the central station or to the underground. So bicycle allowance is a favor of the employers. This is not compulsory, but it could be compulsory by a sectorial collective agreement. There's a lot of sectorial collective agreement in Belgium. In fact, almost every sector are integrated in sectorial collective agreements. And if it is made compulsory, it could also have some limitation from some collective agreement or other. For the public sector, it is made compulsory by a decree. So it is compulsory for all the public sectors. So what type of bike? All type of bike could have bike allowance. And in 2016, it has been extended to the speed pedelec. Speed pedelec is pedal assistant bike up to for 45 kilometers. So the main objective is to encourage workers to use their bike. And the kilometer allowance is tax exempted up to 24 cents. It is to say that the employer can give more than 24 cents per kilometer, but then if it is more than 24 cents, the amount above 24 cents will be taxed. Next slide, please. So I give you here one example, two examples. First, for an employee who make 20 kilometers per day, 10 kilometers one way, if you receive the maximum deductibility allowance, 24 cents, 200 days per year, it could be 960 euro per year. And of course, if it made more kilometers, like 40 kilometers per day, it could be almost 2,000 euro per year. Next slide, please. So I will give you some results of this bike allowance. First, every two years, our ministry make a big homework inquiry. It is an inquiry which is compulsory for all the employers of more than 100 people. And following this inquiry in 2017, 88% of the company offer a bike allowance to their employee. So what is the impact of this bike allowance? We can see that in company where there is which offer reimbursement bike or allowance, the bike share is 12%, and in the other company, the bike share is only 7%. However, we must neutralize some effect and spatial effect, and if we neutralize this effect, we can consider that the impact of the bike allowance increase the bike share of 36%. So some other figures from the evolution from 2014 to 2019, the number of beneficiaries of this allowance has increased by almost 50%, 49%. Some other figures, as we can see that there is 46,000 companies which offer a bike allowance. It represents almost 600,000 beneficiaries and 14% of the total employee workforce in Belgium. In 2019, it represents 608 million kilometers. And in average, each beneficiary received 289 euro. Next slide, please. So I will present the fiscal treatment of the company bike. So for the employer, the cost of acquisition, maintenance, and repair of bike is 100% deductible. Tax benefit could also be granted to company for the installment of bike parking or showers. And there is no social security contribution if the bike is used for homework journey. So there is some verification that the employee must use the bike for homework travel. In general, we accept that if 10 to 20% of the travel are made by bike, it is 100% deductible. For the employee, there is no tax on the revenue if the bike is used for homework journey. And it is important to note that this fiscal advantage of the bike company can be cumulated with the advantage of the kilometer bike allowance. You can have both. And even you can also deduct deductibility in the real cost in your imposition. There is three advantages: company bike, allowance, and you can also have real cost deductibility. Next slide, please. So what is the result of fiscal treatment of company bike? We have made a survey in 2019, and among people commuting to work by bicycle, 7.5% have a company bike. I will give you just an example of a leasing bike. It's a bit different. Here, the employee pay part of the bike, and if, for example, you want to receive a bike of 3,600 plus other service like assurance, repair, maintenance, etc. Generally, it is a contract of three-year contract with a buying option at the end. It will only pay 38 euro per month in net wage, because the advantage is that he paid most of the leasing cost with the brutto wage, and the difference is quite big between net wage and brutto wage in Belgium. Here, the example, it is for someone who earn 3,500 euro per month. So a recent inquiry have shown that 28% of the Belgian workers are interested in a company leasing bike, and thus there is a big possible increase in the following year for leasing bike. We can see that a lot of bank offer and leasing bike to do and develop a new product on this. To finish, I will present. We do not have global figure on the number of company bike, but we have number with the speed pedelec, because speed pedelec must be registered. And last month we have in total 45,000 speed pedelec registered, and among them 41% are registered by firm or leasing company. Next slide. So I give you here some a summary of the company bike and bike allowance. So for the deductibility for the employers, deductibility is 100%. Employee, there is no deductibility. It is for acquisition, maintenance, repair, parking, and showers. Advantage in kind. There is no advantage yet for employer, but for the employee, there is no advantage in kind. There's no taxation for a company bike. Social security contribution, no contribution for the employer, no contribution for the employee. For the deductibility of VAT, it is a little more complex. If no contribution from the employee, the deductibility is a percentage of the use for professional usage. By professional usage, for the VAT regulation, home work journey is not considered as a professional usage. But if there is a contribution from the employee, like the example I have, the previous example, then there is a 100% VAT deductibility. And for bike allowance, there is no tax for the employee. The deductibility is 100% from the employer, and from the employee, there is no tax if the bike allowance is below 20 cents per kilometer. If it is above 20 cents, there is a tax on the revenue for the part above 20 cents per kilometer. Next slide, please. So I will finish with the future. And the law of 4 April 2019 has decided that when it will be allowed in the EU regulation, Belgium will apply a low VAT rate on all type of bikes, bicycles, normal bikes, pedelec, and speed pedelec. However, it has not been yet decided, and there is two possibilities for this. Either a complete review of the VAT regulation, but it could take 2 or 3 years because it is a fiscal measure and it is quite difficult to have an agreement on this. And or simply a revision of the Annex 3 of the current regulations, but here also we need an unanimity at the European level. So it could also take some time. I think this is my last slide. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Laurent, for giving us this overview of what has been done and what is being done at the federal level in Belgium. So I think we can now move on to our panel discussion. So with all three of you. So to the audience, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to put them in the Q&A part. So I will take a look at them. I will start with a question, a first one for Holger. Holger, you've been giving us an overview of different types of measures that can be taken. But why should authorities at different levels, be it city, regional, or national, federal governments, actually invest into these measures? What are the benefits for them?
Yeah, I mean, the benefits are multiple. I think, yeah, when we looked at incentives that are in place at the moment for company cars and also for electric cars, we see that there are a lot of disbenefits in terms of congestion, in terms of air quality, physical inactivity, and actually cycling really turns this around and turns this into benefits. So there are lots of savings in terms of public health. Also, yeah, for reduced mortality. Then there's also savings for employers themselves if they offer incentives based on the tax schemes, so they can reduce absence from the workplace because of sickness, for example. And yeah, then we reduce CO2 emissions, reduce air pollution. So actually investing in these schemes is yeah, paying off for public authorities. I think that's the main message here.
A remarkable statistic, Caroline. I was reading up on the impact report for the work scheme in the UK, and they were extremely worried that only kind of existing cyclists would take advantage of the scheme. But based on the health return alone, if only 2% of the participants were new participants, it would pay for the entire scheme. So I think, particularly to kind of governments and others doing this, don't worry about that part. I mean, people cycle more, but that you don't need a great net growth to get a fantastic return on investment.
That's a really impressive number. Thanks a lot for sharing that, Kevin. But coming back to you, Kevin, regarding these benefits, as you were mentioning, and also the benefits in terms of job creation and of having a growth into a greener economy sector. What additional, beside tax and purchase incentives, could public authorities take? What additional measures could you think about that would further help?
Well, I think what's interesting is that the business sector has proved willing to kind of step into this space, and it is, I think particularly of our colleagues. I know Colin's is in the audience, but the work that Lise Rad and No Job Rad did. I mean, you need to get your banking arrangements. You need to sometimes you need to have a credit license. You need to have kind of a certain status, because these businesses end up being fiscal institutions. They're not bike shops. And there has to be a willingness of the public bodies and the kind of fiscal financial sector to be part of this process. And that then enables kind of leasing to take place. And so we need that kind of intervention from the public body side to get these benefits, like the health return, like the kind of reduced congestion. I know a lot of companies increasingly are under pressure for things like parking spaces. And if you have, they're called different things in different countries, but if you have a green travel plan that's imposed on you, then switching your employees to bikes with the benefits of this. But again, you may not need a tax break. You may not need a scheme, but you may want a leasing package or a bicycle service package just to make it easy for first-time cyclists to engage. So it is, I mean, it's a classic example, I think, of public-private partnership, but in a very different way. It's not like putting in a public-private partnership to launch a new bus service. It's actually public benefit from private enterprise helping you, and that's quite different, I think. And so there's definitely, I think, the lessons learned in the countries where it's part of the tax scheme is you need the government to be willing to play an enabling role. When really experienced people are taking 4 to 5 years to crack the tax code to make it possible, that proves there are institutional barriers where we need help.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks a lot, Kevin, for that. So coming to you, Laurent, who you are working in a public authority, hard to implement these. If there are colleagues of you from other countries watching us today, what recommendation would you give to them to facilitate the processes, to make it easier to put these measures into place?
Have a good network with all the administration, I think, and good connection with the different cabinet. I think it is what is it needed, because you need approval at the high level, so you need to have contact with direct member of the different cabinet to pass some measures. I think it, and also have good statistic with the result of the measure, like we have measure, like the inquiry we made every 3 years for every employer of more than 100%. It could give you some insight. You can measure the impact of the measure.
That's probably a very important thing to measure the impact of the different things that are being put in place to be able to show the results. If we look at the market penetration, Kevin, for example, in the Northern and Western Europe from e-bikes, it's really impressive. Now we see that in the Southern and Eastern Europe, there is still room for improvement. What do you think could really be key elements that would enable these countries to achieve the same market penetration?
I think, we have to recognize that if people are used to seeing a bicycle as something you buy for 200 euros, 100 euros from a supermarket, to suddenly be asked to spend 2,000 euros on a bicycle just feels extraordinary. I mean, you may well spend that amount of money on a car, but it is an enormous leap. And the only people spending that kind of money on bikes are kind of racing cyclists who are buying a top-end machine. So the spread to what I'm going to call the more general user, people who just want to commute, you have to cross this barrier that a bicycle is a 1,500, 2,000 euro item. Now, fiscal incentives can do that, but coming down from 2,000 to 1,500, still a very, very expensive bicycle if your starting point is 200. And maybe cost spreading, like the kind of various leasing schemes, makes that more visible and more achievable, because people can conceive. I mean, I think Swapfeed's e-bikes were about 70 to 80 euros a month. And so you're in a league where people might say, okay, I'm willing to give that a try. But I think you need also good support from people like employers networks to turn this into company bike schemes, to turn this into something that's promoted. And what we did find, for example, even in Sweden, which is a country with a high GDP, what the big Swedish government scheme did was kind of turbocharge the whole market. And that changed the language, where the e-bike was kind of a conversation piece. And so the kind of government intervention and the fact it was a big fiscal package was a strong talking point. And Sweden was nowhere in our graph. I mean, it was way down in the countries of not much happening, and went straight to number 4, number 5 in Europe in 1 year. And I'm sure that the fact of the noise that was created around that scheme had a big effect. But I still rest on the fact that at a government level and a company level, you've got to deal with accessibility. And I think finally, if you can't deal with accessibility purely in money terms, the question mark would be, would you be better off as a government subsidizing, for example, electric bike share, so that everybody can try an electric bike for 5 years on the streets of the city? But then you need to strike a partnership with your bike share company or with your public transport authority and make that a realistic option. And that's possibly the way forward. And when we proposed with ECF what should go in the European recovery plans, we did say in low GDP countries, low cycling level countries, take a serious look at electric bike share as well.
Thanks a lot, Kevin, for that. It is true that in many people's mind, we need to find ways to make people realize that the bike can really, together with other measures, be a replacement for car and lead to car-free living, which will then really unfold the true potential of all these measures. There is a question in the chat, Holger, that is addressed to you, but I think that probably everyone could say something about it. It's about how should the commuter allowance be designed so that it unfolds its greatest possible ecological and social impact, especially in Germany?
I think that's something that you have in several European countries, kind of a mode neutral commuting allowance that you can deduct from your taxes. So I think Germany, Netherlands, Austria, and I think that's a very encompassing issue that also relates to even spatial planning, I would say, because basically this allowance gives an incentive to live far away from your workplace. Of course, there's a social component in there for sure, but I think going into the future, these kind of incentives will have to be phased out and maybe replaced by more targeted social interventions. Also, maybe making villages more attractive, also attracting jobs to rural areas so that people don't have to drive 50, 60 kilometers every day. And then also, I think there have to be also incentives to live closer to the workplace in a more general term. So maybe making this allowance higher for the first 5 kilometers or for the first 10 kilometers instead of making it higher for the last 20 kilometers. After 20 kilometers would be a way. I think there's some models that could be discussed, but I think in general it has to go towards incentivizing more living closer to your workplace.
Thank you, Holger. If we look at Belgium, Laurent, we do have many company cars on our streets, and there has been ongoing discussions in recent years about how to change the legislation around that. Is there any solution or possibility that you would see that could push for more sustainable mobility behavior from employees, especially?
Yes, there is a lot of company cars, if this is the question, and there's a decision of the government to reduce the advantage of the company cars and to for 2026 every company car must be electric. If it is not, it will be not. There is no deductibility possible for other type of cars. So this is what it has not been yet implemented. It must be discussed with the Minister of Finance, but it is in the agreement, in the federal agreement.
Mm-hmm. But it is again a measure that will favor car-based mobility, because an electric car is still a car, and it won't help in terms of easing congestion and these sort of things. When we look back at what Holger was saying about having people living closer to their workplace, I mean, we know also that living in city centers is very expensive, more expensive than living on the countryside. So, and we also know that these company cars are also being put in place to find a way to increase the salary package of employees that are heavily taxed in Belgium. So couldn't we switch that sort of fiscality to, for example, helping people to pay back their mortgage or their rent, these sort of to move it away from this car-based mobility?
Yes, there's also a decision to we have a mobility budget in Belgium, but for the moment it is only available to owner of company cars, and there is an objective to give a mobility budget for all the workers. And in this mobility budget, you can use a small car with or electric or with less emission, but it is fiscally interesting to use a sustainable transport mode, and you can also deductibility of the home cost if you live near your work. If you live less than 5 kilometers from your works, you can deduct the mortgage of your habitation.
Okay, great. So we see that there is a bit more creative thinking into trying to enlarge the different benefits and ways of increasing the packages of salaries. Okay, I have another question for Holger, which is more about the link between these fiscal and financial incentives and other measures to promote cycling, and how do they play together?
Yeah, maybe that's something that we should mention also in this respect, because now we talk about these fiscal incentives and the financial incentives, but there are of course also investments necessary in infrastructure so that people feel safe when they cycle, and that cycling is convenient, fast, and comfortable. Also, if you look if you look at the Belgian example on the incentives that are given for speed pedelecs, this is of course best combined with investments in cycle highways that connect the suburbs with city centers, so that it can also cover, let's say, medium distances between 15 and 20 kilometers easily and comfortably with speed pedelecs. So this has to go hand in hand. Investments in fiscal incentives, in purchase premiums, in the infrastructure, also in bike sharing schemes, for example. So that's it shouldn't be forgotten.
Thank you very much. Looking more specifically at urban logistics. So Kevin, you've been talking about cargo bikes already a bit. We have seen with the COVID crisis and with increasing online sales that were sort of suffering in our cities from this white van invasion. They're everywhere, and probably it's not the most efficient way of bringing packages to people. So what sort of incentives could we bring or could have been imagined to further promote a sustainable urban logistics system that would be based on cargo bikes? So that's maybe for Kevin and Laurent.
Sure. No, I think, it's important to understand when we look at vans in cities that the huge increase in, we'll call them light commercial vehicles in Europe, hasn't just come from logistics. It's also come from a culture of outsourcing, a culture of kind of service vehicles. And then it's interesting that actually logistics vehicles are still only actually about 20% of the van fleet. The vast majority of those vehicles are actually in general duties for companies or in servicing technicians. The person comes to fix your air conditioning or your computer or your washing machine. They're in doing those roles. And so we have to look right across the way commercial vehicles come into use. And it's quite interesting that the logistics companies, and if you stretch that into things like Uber Eats and and Deliveroo and food logistics, and the tradition right back to postal services, the bicycles have had quite high historic penetration, and that high penetration is coming back, especially with the e-bike and the cargo bike. But if you go to the small business that has one or two vehicles, they go to a leasing company, they go to a bank, they get some money, and they get another vehicle. And the bicycle is virtually invisible in that segment because it is so easy for a small business to get a van. They might get, it depends on the country, but they might get a capital allowance. They might get a VAT deduction. They might get a government incentive to electrify that van increasingly, or to take an old diesel van off the road and, terrifyingly for many years, buy a newer diesel van was incentivized. They might get discounts on congestion charging and parking. So there is a whole package that cities and not even national governments apply to commercial vehicles that really, they've basically locked in what I call van thinking. It is just so easy, and there are few barriers. And it takes a very, very brave mayor to start arguing with small businesses in his city, because they're politically noisy sometimes and in social media, that kind of thing. So our view has been, actually, maybe we're not fighting directly against that, but we need to put cargo bike and logistics bikes and service bikes into the same structure, which is, so, you know, if you go to your bank or your leasing company and you say, I'd like a new van, please, or I'd like a new van loan, that organization has a kind of brochure that also says, oh, we also do these. And, you know, that's not something the cargo bike sector can set up from scratch. That's something the cargo bike sector has to go and engage with leasing companies, with service providers, with vehicle rental companies, with service companies. And then we want to build the kind of fiscal incentives into that way of delivery. So you can write off your VAT immediately. You can get your capital allowances immediately. You don't going to have a fight with your accountant or your tax office about whether it's eligible, because it's just the same as when you lease your van. So I think the biggest opportunity we see is the fact that there are nearly 2 million diesel vans a year being sold in the EU plus UK. And if we're going to attack that market, we've got to become, I hate to say almost sadly, but we must become like them. And so everywhere a government applies an incentive, for example, for electric vans, they must apply that incentive for cargo bike. The logistics companies will make their decisions for different reasons. They're making their decisions based on access. And there it is back, as Holger said, on infrastructure, but it's back to congestion zones, low emission zones, car-free city centres, heavily restricted parking, and it just becomes commercially impossible to operate in a city without including an element of bike in your work. And that's why UPS, DHL, GLS, and some of the others have, and quietly, some of our contacts are now selling bikes to people like Amazon in preparation for a large-scale shift in the way this happens. But it's all a reaction to policy. So I think it's policy for logistics, and I think it's about entering the van market properly from the business side to deal with the wider market.
Thank you, Kevin, for that great overview. It's true, it's many measures that need to come together for these things to happen. Laurent, is this something that you're looking at?
For cargo bike, purchase incentive is not a federal competence, it is a regional or local competence. In Belgium, there is some incentive at the regional level, but it is not a competence of the federal, so we cannot make incentive for purchase cargo bike. However, we have made some modification of the road code to allow some pilot project for cargo bike. For larger cargo bike, we have allowed for larger cargo bike to go to bike pass. So there is a possibility to increase I think that there is a lot of potential for cargo bike, but we must also adapt road code and the infrastructures in the cities for this type of bike.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. Okay, thank you very much, Laurent. So we're almost at the end of our session. I don't know if there's any other, there was one other question, Holger, which was more addressed to you, if you would know about the amount of the scrappage grant in Lithuania and Finland.
I think I answered it in the chat.
It's already answered.
So
Okay,
then
then
exchange there.
Then we're all good. We're all good for that. Okay, then I would like to thank you, Holger, Kevin, and Laurent, for your great presentations, for the great discussion. Thank you to the audience for being with us today. If you want to hear more about fiscal incentives and hear from different countries, join Velocity in September in Lisbon. There will be different sessions that will tackle this issue. A lot is being done at the moment. We're in the middle of the boom, so come and get inspired. You're very welcome. And thank you once again for joining our session today.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.